Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at one of John Doyle's videos in which he talks about individualism and collectivism, and he briefly mentions anarcho-capitalists and explains his critique of anarcho-capitalists. So I'm going to show that critique and then we're going to talk about why he's wrong and why you should be an anarcho-capitalist rather than something like a paleo-conservative.
Thinking reasonably with unreasonable or incorrect presuppositions will always lead away from the truth, obviously. It's going to lead away from the correct solution and instead lead into confusion or incorrect answers. And I'll give you an example. Right off the bat, let's put the end caps on suicide watch. Right now, we are in a position where there are transnational megacorporations that have more power than the state. These corporations are run by woke oligarchs who want to and do successfully profit from the degeneration of our society. They also largely have control over our government so as to destroy small businesses, perspective or actual competition, etc. Sometimes this is what's referred to as state capitalism or corporatism, or in other words, not true capitalism. So why does this happen in the first place? Well, because as the ANCAP will happily tell you, businesses have an incentive to maximize market share and profits, all that good stuff, and the logical consequence of a corporation gaining enough wealth and market share to where it's more powerful than the state is simply for it to weaponize the state by buying it so as to maintain that position of wealth and power. This is exactly what's happening now, so what's the solution? Well, just go back to the free market. So it can happen again? Like, how are you even going to do that in the first place when now the elites own your government? You're not. The natural cycle of total free market capitalism has progressed in front of our very eyes, and we are confused by this because we've been spoon-fed decades of capitalism equals good propaganda, and it is. No one's saying it's not. No one is making the argument that, like, markets are inefficient. This is simply an indictment of the idea of capitalism purely for capitalism's sake, of amoral markets, that because of man's flawed nature will always devolve into the current state. Plus, the state of technology, everything being so connected, everything being so centralized, this is just inevitable. Well, monopolies can only be created by the state. Yeah, maybe that was true like 150 years ago. Not anymore. We're not talking about steel and rubber anymore or whatever. Like, the idea is only true in the abstract, on paper. Nowadays, the only thing that could prevent a monopoly is the state, if its allegiance were, to small businesses and to the American people, but it isn't because it's been bought out by the elite class because there's such a huge disparity between the power of these corporations and the power of the state. And it's funny, too, because anarcho-capitalists will try to appear reasonable by saying, well, we're not saying it's a perfect system. Obviously, everything has flaws. Hey, here's a flaw. Well, no, because that's not actually true capitalism. So in summary, orthodox free market theory, which makes perfect sense in theory. It's crystal clear on paper, but in practice, it turns out that things are slightly more complicated than that. Businesses get bigger than the state, then they weaponize the state to crush their competition. No more competition. Cool. Now I can become totally woke and I don't have to worry about losing money over it.
So right off the bat, John starts with a mighty contentious point, that there are multinational corporations with more power than the state. Now this is quite the assertion, and one might even ask, how exactly is John quantifying force to come to this conclusion? Really, we can only talk about force quantification in terms of monopoly. States are the only entities with monopolies on the use of and initiation of force over their given territories, and corporations just use this force to their benefit. But again, any force that these corporations enact must be done so at the state's hands. So ultimately, I think you would be quite hard-pressed to say that these corporations transcend the state in terms of power. Which corporations have a monopoly on force? Which corporations have a monopoly on the printing and issuing of global currency? Now, throughout this video, we will use John's own framework, which we have already proven to be ludicrous, to showcase all the inconsistencies in his worldview. John then goes on to talk about how these corporations lobby, or buy out as he puts it, the government to get things that they want, extending all the way to things such as destroying small businesses, and how these corporations may profit off of the degeneration of society. Now, I would have liked John to be more specific about which corporations exactly are profiting off of the degeneration of society. John even mentions later on how being woke is not a profitable thing, and you must obtain a large market share or monopoly in order for it to be profitable for you. So if state power is being utilized to degenerate society, what is really doing it? Is it capitalism or statism? None of these talking points John has made so far in any way contrast with a libertarian worldview. In fact, taking from the writings of the likes of Rothbard and Hans Hermann Hoppe, everything John has spoken of so far seems to be the logical conclusion, not of free markets, as John later tries to argue, but of statism. In fact, even from the framework John has set up, we can show how this degeneration ultimately leads back to the state. So, in John's framework, these powerful corporate oligarchs get their power from the state, which they are also somehow more powerful than, even though he is now stating they get their power from the state. And they use this power to crowd out small businesses and profit off the degeneration of our society, as he puts it. We can establish two causes here, a proximate cause and an ultimate cause. The proximate cause is the corporations profiting off the degeneration of our society, but the ultimate cause is in fact the state, as the ability to partake in such profiteering necessitates the state power to enable this. For example of proximate and ultimate causes, we can look at the food service industry. Say there's a restaurant that frequently serves undercooked steaks. The proximate cause of these undercooked steaks are the cooks that are undercooking the steaks. However, the ultimate cause falls on the management, and it is their job to ensure proper employment of cooks who, well, know how to cook, and to make sure undercooked steaks are not being served. Now, I think John Doyle may make the argument that he is saying that the state has more power because these corporations control the government, but ultimately the government maintains supremacy of power. The corporations are still only to operate insofar as the state body allows it. If these corporations were to step out of line, the state could and would easily come down with the entire force of the state to stop whatever transgressions it deems illegitimate from continuing. So, the logical consequences of a corporation becoming more powerful than the state is it needs to use the state's power to secure its goals? Again, we have to ask John, how exactly are these corporations more powerful? And where exactly has he made the argument against libertarianism? All he has done is shown with the existence of the state, cronyism will seemingly always occur. If you ask me, John Doyle is halfway to making a great argument for anarchism. Doyle really and truly is just asking a question. How do we get to the state of free markets? And he assumes an answer. He assumes that we have to employ some sort of top-down implementation of our system from a federal level. And while no libertarian would likely reject a federal tax cut or federal deregulation, this is not the intended means of most libertarians. Most libertarians find the effective strategy to be, well, a combination of strategies. There's localism, counter-economics, and much more. And almost all of these can be used in conjunction with some broadly federal strategy. From what it seems, most paleo-conservatives don't actually have many contentions with free markets, outside of their fundamental misunderstandings of them or blatant strawmans. Even here, John recognizes that markets are necessary, and that, in theory, markets are sound. Of course, he is just using this surface-level critique, the same critique your 9th grade history teacher says about communism. The difference is, communism is not good on paper. We, through economic analysis and analysis of power structures through things like public choice, can see why socialist implementations lead to the conclusions they seemingly always lead to. However, this is not the case for free markets. We can establish a social order that is not predicated upon the certain power structures that will necessarily lead to some corporatist hellhole. This doesn't mean that it will happen overnight. There's a lot of work to be done. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will a free society. Our free society is riding on the backs of theorists that predate us, hundreds or thousands of years. This task of the accomplishment of a free society is accumulation of reason throughout history applied to interhuman conflict. You may say freedom is for the birds, because those who fear freedom are weak, but the problem of how do I achieve my ideal society is not solely a problem for libertarians. In fact, it is the problem of every single political order. Even John would reject this current social order, rather vehemently too. So why don't we ask John the same question? How do we get where you want to be? These people tend to think that since they share similar views to one of the major political parties, that their problems are halfway solved, that their goals could easily be achieved. However, this couldn't be further from the truth, and it is precisely because they have no foundational understanding of economics as applied to power structures and democracy. Now on to John Doyle's supposed criticisms of individuals. Critics of rugged individualism or anatomized individualism are often founded on the confusion of tongues. They, like many in their criticisms of many things, are just blatant strawmen. They take us to support some sort of man in the wild on its own with no dependency of any other people, or something of the like. People existing within a social order or within a family or community is in no way opposed to a notion of individualism. In fact, the market order recognizes man's dependency on many things through the social division of labor, allowing for rational allocation of resources via man's faculty to reason or accomplish our goals. Within the market society, we are all dependent upon each other. However, we are dependent on each other insomuch as the others are dependent upon us. Society is founded upon norms, upon contracts between persons, meaning society is a cohesive bond between men, each dependent upon the respect of these norms. This, John might assert, is his critique of individualism. Man needs other man. Imagine a baby born into a family. The smallest unit is a family. But the notion of individualism never stated some sort of independency upon other people. To quote the great Ludwig von Mises, "The self-sufficient individual is independent, but he is not free. He is at the mercy of everybody who is stronger than himself. The stronger fellow has the power to kill him with impunity." It is therefore nonsense to rant about an alleged natural and inborn freedom which people are supposed to have enjoyed in the ages preceding the emergence of social bonds. Man was not created free. What freedom he may possess has been given to him by society. Only societal conditions can present a man with an orbit within the limits he can attain liberty. Liberty and freedom are the conditions of man within a contractual society. So what then do we mean when we say individualism? We are asserting that the fundamental moral and legal unit is the individual. That in order for a free society, we must have contracts, and these contracts must be between individuals, founded upon the respect for each of these individuals' rights. These men are still dependent on each other, but their dependency is upon the recognition of man as an individual. Individualists do not reject society, social order, social bonds, social conditions. These things are necessary precepts for individualism to occur. So one may say that this dichotomy between individualism and collectivism is absurd, and if so, so be it. However, I think there is still great value in these terms when looking at them from the right perspective. But then again, asking a paleo-conservative to look at things from the right perspective is like asking a fish to breathe air. But I digress.
It would do the paleo-conservative much good to embrace something like paleo-libertarianism. Both the economics and philosophies that come out of paleo-libertarianism are very useful weapons against the left. Many paleo-conservatives have fallen victims of anti-intellectualism and the embracing of unending state power. Ultimately, none of these things are ever going to help any sort of traditionalist movement, and will in fact do quite the opposite.
And that is it for today's video, guys. Thank you for watching, and I would especially like to thank Zane Mooneyhan for his help in this video. You can check out some of his videos on the Volunteerist Haven YouTube channel. I'd also like to thank the patrons, Jeppy, Jackson Sepulvado, Surditade, Some Hoppian Guy, William Nunnery Jr., and Monolithic Ethos.
We talked about it, we extended the olive branch, we squashed the beef, we're now friends again.
We're besties, we're best friends.
It's so true,
Absolutely.
it's so true.